Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History. My name is Marcia Eli. I am the director of the public programs here at the center. I have the delight of saying a few words of greeting on behalf of everybody at the Center for Brooklyn History and the Brooklyn Public Library, which we are part of, as you probably know, and the Arts and Culture team BPL Presents. I want to acknowledge right off the bat that our board chair, the Brooklyn Public Library board chair, is here. Nina Collins, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I don't know if there are other board members here tonight, but thank you. There are many over there. Okay, thank you. I acknowledge you all. I can't see who everybody is, but thank you for much. So let me just say a word about what happens here. Many things happen in this gorgeous landmark building. During the day, people explore our exhibitions, they rest and work and gather here in the Great Hall. Students are served by our education programs, and many researchers from all walks of life spend hours lost in our collections, working right above our heads in the historic Othmer Reading Room, which is extraordinary, and if you haven't seen it, it's worth coming back to just see the architectural treasure that it is. As many of you know, CBH provides free access to the largest collection of Brooklyn-related materials in the world, and we have expert guidance from an incredible, passionate library staff, and of course, we offer many free public programs like this one in the evenings. Tonight, we're honored to welcome an amazing thinker, Claire Hoffman, an astute writer on culture, celebrity, religion, business, and the business of fame. Claire's new book, Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson, touches on all of the above. We're thrilled that Claire's conversation partner this evening is Pulitzer Prize winner Eliza Griswold, and you'll hear more about them, both of them, in a moment. I also want to acknowledge, thank you, Linda, our president, Brooklyn Public Library President Linda Johnson is here as well. So for many reasons, you'll hear why in a minute. It's a very special night. I just want to share that Sister Sinner is available at the CBH shop. Over there in that corner, Claire will sign copies following the program. At the end of their discussion, we'll turn to you and your questions. Our ushers will bring a mic to you at your seat. I only ask that you please keep your questions brief. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about tonight's guests. Claire Hoffman works as a journalist and author. Her first book, the powerful memoir, Greetings from Utopia Park, Surviving a Transcendent Childhood, was published in 2016. She's a former staff reporter for the Los Angeles Times and Rolling Stone. She serves on a number of boards, including the board of the Brooklyn Public Library. She is on the Center for Brooklyn History Committee, and so that makes hosting her tonight all the more an honor. Eliza Griswold is the author of 6 books of poetry and nonfiction. Her book, Amity and Prosperity, One Family and the Fracturing of America, won the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in General Nonfiction. Eliza navigates the intersection of religion, art, the environment, and news, and she is currently the Ferris Professor and Director of the Program in Journalism at Princeton University. Please help me welcome Claire and Eliza to the stage.
Are you on?
Yes.
This is so much fun. First of all, thank you so much, Marcia. I think in this time that we're living, public conversation has become a whole other thing. It's really sustaining and feels almost ceremonial, or it really grounds it is helping to ground me in these days. And so it's a pleasure to do this with you. And thank you so much for providing this beautiful space. It is rare that you get to sweat and bleed a book. Hi, now. To a book with a friend, and then get to talk with them publicly. I have really had the great pleasure of watching this gorgeous gem be birthed and then polish itself and be polished. And it's just so cuttingly beautiful and so beautifully wrought. So it's really a pleasure to do this.
Thank you so much for doing it, Eliza. I'm so appreciative, and I do just want to say I am so appreciative of you all being here, and I'm a big fan of the Brooklyn Public Library. So if this is your first visit, please don't let it be its last. The Center for Brooklyn History is a magical place in the city, and I'm just so grateful to Linda and Nina and Marcia and Lexi for setting this up. We're so excited to do it. And Eliza is an icon and a grand master of journalism. So I'm excited.
Well, it's really fun. So, okay, now we've gotten that out of the way. So can you tell us a little bit about who, for those of us who haven't had the chance to read this book yet, who is Aimee?
Yeah, so Aimee Semple McPherson she was born in 1890 in rural Canada, and she came from a small kind of working class family, very religious. Her mother was a Salvation Army suffragette, and from the beginning, Aimee was sort of treated with special care. Her mother saw her as prophesied by God as kind of fulfilling her own religious destiny in the world. So kind of unusual for a young girl in rural Canada at the turn of the century to be sort of lavished with attention and praise and be told that she was prophetic. And she grew up into high school. She was very sort of naturally a leader, kind of a standout thespian. She was, very dramatic. She loved singing and performing, and she felt that she was sort of moving away from God. And I just realized you probably wanted me to just say what her general things were, not like her. Here's the story.
No. I actually like this. I'm thinking, yes, this is an excellent.
Yeah, I'll move quickly. But she converted to Pentecostalism at the same time that she fell madly in love at 17 years old, and she felt called to be an evangelist. And she had already had this kind of deep sense from her childhood that she was born for great things, and she had a really strong voice in her head always telling her that she needed to go out and to preach the gospel, and that she was destined for something special. And what that meant, racing ahead, is that she moved to Los Angeles in 1918, just as the city was kind of becoming a city. It had just, gotten water a few years earlier. It's this incredible moment right around the beginning of or in the middle of World War I, and there was just this huge movement of people moving to Los Angeles at that time. And she had gathered an incredible following of congregants who, initially the attraction to come see her preach was that she was a woman, which is fairly unusual. And there was this kind of freak show aspect to it, that to come see a woman preach. But she had incredible charisma and power. She believed that she had the gift of healing. And so, over the course of the teens and into the 20s, she built a national following so that when she would come to towns across America, tens of thousands of people would show up at these revivals. And in 1923, she built the Angelus Temple, which is considered the first megachurch in America. And part of that is that it was both a church and a center of entertainment and a city kind of unto itself, with 26 departments and 110-person chorus, just this massive enterprise that really is the model for a lot of the ways that people worship today. She started her first, one of the first Christian radio stations in 1924. She was one of the first women to be preaching on the radio. So she was this real kind of pioneer, trailblazing lady evangelist. And then at the height of her fame in 1926, she became immersed in this massive scandal. So that's Aimee Semple McPherson.
That's a perfect setup. It's a very Aimee Semple McPherson setup.
Yeah, she would have told it to you a little longer.
Okay, so do you think now, like thinking of her as a child, this like burden of being chosen by God, do you think in this context, if she were a child, say in this neighborhood at this time, like would we see those qualities? Would that be we think she was mentally ill? Like, or is this just like helicopter parent, tiger mom gone awry?
Yeah, I think more tiger mom. I mean, probably some flashes of extreme mental functioning. I don't know how to say it. You know, she had her highs and lows, I would say. We can get to that later. But I think as a kid, she just was extraordinarily adept at getting people to see the world her way. So she would tell a classic story about being teased at school for being part of the Salvation Army, which, just to know, like the Salvation Army in 1900 was like a freaky, crazy Christian cult, you know, like it was very unusual, very fringe, like not accepted in the mainstream, but her mother was part of it. And the kids made fun of her, and within, 20 minutes, she had gotten them all to put on little tin hats and bang on drums and follow her around, acting out the Salvation Army, parade. So that was sort of her way.
That's a perfect story. That's a perfect story to give a sense of who she was. So let's pause a minute so we know who she was, and now we know she brings Pentecostalism, right? The fastest growing religion in the world, right? She brings this into the American landscape in a different way, right? So can you talk a little bit about what is Pentecostalism? Where did it come from? And how did she express it? And what survives her and is thriving today?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if it's an important thing to know about in the world, in my opinion. Pentecostalism is the fastest growing religion in the world. They count 650 million people today, a quarter of the world's Christians who are Pentecostal and charismatic. Donald Trump's faith advisor, Paula White, is a charismatic Christian who speaks in tongues. So it's super relevant. It's not a small thing anymore. But to go back in time, the origins of Pentecostalism kind of come from a lot of different places, but the sort of what would you say, like igniting event was in 1906 in Los Angeles on a little street in downtown called Azusa. This African-American preacher named William Seymour came. He had learned in the Midwest from a holiness preacher who had talked about these gifts from the Pentecost, which is this idea in Acts after the resurrection, where all the apostles are sitting at a table and they are, this magical wind. I should pause and say that I didn't grow up Christian, and we talked earlier. I was like, if we get into the Bible,
I can step in if we
shaky
get
ground.
lost in magical wind.
I was like, there's a magic wind, right? It is kind of a magical wind, isn't there?
It is the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Okay, that is the magic wind.
That is indeed the magical wind. In my house with a 12-year-old boy, magical wind has a different meaning.
Yeah. I'm like on the magic school bus right now. But the apostles received these gifts, and they include speaking in tongues, this idea that your body is kind of taken over by the Holy Spirit, right? Which is a really powerful, individualized experience of of the Holy Spirit and of Christianity, right? It's a really intensely personal experience of Jesus. And I think that is the area where you see all this growth, very individualized with physical manifestations. I mean, the other ones are divine healing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, a huge piece of it is prosperity gospel now
Right.
is money, wealth. What kind of, if God is your father, what kind of God would want his kids to be poor, right? And we see this in Aimee so strongly,
Yeah.
right? And I think one of the most inscriptional moments of this book, which Claire knows, is this bathing suit she wears because she was a big swimmer, right?
That was part of my interest in her, was swimming.
Can you talk a little bit about her relation to material culture? Did that draw people to her? Is she sort of an early American capitalist who people, like, is that part of the draw?
Definitely. And Aimee, I mean, this was why she was sort of this perfect person at this perfect moment in time that created all these foundations of culture. So, I mean, in Los Angeles, you have all these people who are moving from rural areas, in the Midwest, and who are separated from their families and from their churches and kind of their sense of a way of life. And at the same time, they're coming into a city with these kind of hopes of self-transformation and dreams of kind of making it big, right?
Yeah.
That's the big kind of LA promise. And Aimee, I mean, the Angelus Temple, which she built, was like kind of perfectly both of these things. On one hand, she wanted it to feel like you were at a tent revival. So she crushed, these seashells, or she had crushed, I should say. She managed someone crushing. She had crushed seashells mixed into the paint so that the sky above, it's this giant domed ceiling would sparkle and you would feel like you were outdoors. But at the same time, the temple was built by the same people who built the Grauman's theater in Hollywood, like all the movie palaces. So it had all this like grandeur. So people would go there and feel, at once like they were part of something grand and important and cosmopolitan and urbane, but also feel like very connected to this kind of primordial nature, old-time fundamentalist religion. And so she kind of bridged that gap. Like, so she would dress up in a milkmaid uniform or outfit or a nurse uniform. She would really talk a lot about her time on the farm and the old-time religion. But she would also do these giant, they were called illustrated sermons, these giant spectacular shows, so that by the mid-1920s, like a lot of Hollywood would go on Sunday night to watch her do these spectacles, which was, it kind of sounds like something familiar now, but was like very unusual then to use. She had like lions and, horses and palm trees and, giant sets and costumes, and that was not something that was being done.
So let's talk a little bit about how money worked, and maybe now we can get into the scandal.
Yeah.
So how did money work in this world, and what happened?
Yeah, how did money work in that world? I think her mother handled the money. So this is a story about Aimee Semple McPherson, but it's secretly a story about her mother, who was kind of in the background, and she worked as her manager, as her nanny, as her accountant. I call her the original momager. Just like this quintessential kind of stage mother, a very early kind of Kris Jenner prototype. But she would travel with Aimee, and people would ask Aimee to come speak, and she'd be like, "Oh, like let's see, is there a donation?" So how did money work? It worked through love offerings, Eliza. That's what she called them. So the temple, they call it, for decades, it was called the $1 Million Temple in Los Angeles because it was this incredibly extravagant, supposedly cost that much thing. But they built it slowly over time. They would go out on the road and get all these love offerings, and Minnie, the mother, would, carefully like organize the payments. She's the one who, filed for their, a religious exemption, like did all the tax work. So Aimee was very much kind of this big, charismatic figure in front of the audience, but behind the scenes, Minnie would take that money and organize it. But Aimee did start to have a taste for finer things.
Not just the bathing suit?
Not just the beige. She started driving a fancy car. She started wearing fur and silk and shopping at fancy places. She went to Paris. Right before she disappeared, there was already kind of a lot of talk about, that her head had been turned.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about her disappearance.
Yes.
Okay, what happened?
Yeah, so on May 18th in 1926, she went swimming in the ocean. She had kind of had this routine where she would take a break. I mean, at this point, she's got about 10,000 people coming on Sundays to see her preach. It's, the biggest church in town. It's one of the biggest churches in the world. It's just this huge enterprise. And she is starting to feel the burden of fame. There's whispers of scandal. There are people who are concerned about her mental state. And so she goes down to Venice Beach in the afternoons to work on her sermons and swim. And that day she was working on a sermon about light and darkness. And she sent her assistant away and she went into the ocean and she vanished. And, very quickly, within 12 hours, it's, a citywide emergency. Over the course of the following days, I think 40,000 people came down to the beach to look for her and to pray for her. 2 people died looking for her. It's just this massive story. And the newspapers can't get enough of it. This is also sort of the beginning of the rivalry between the Los Angeles Times and the Los Angeles Examiner. So, William Randolph Hearst of Citizen Kane fame and Otis Chandler, and it's just this total face-off. So, they can't get enough. And then 35 days later, she's already been mourned for dead. Her mother has already had a memorial service where they raise, I think, $500,000. 35 days later, she walks in from the desert of Mexico, 600 miles away in the middle of the night into somebody's backyard and asks to use the telephone.
That is another, if I were teaching section breaks, I would just, in fact, get ready, because you're going to be teaching section breaks.
Section breaks, yeah.
That is a brilliant place to stop for a minute. Now we'll make people wait to get the foreground narrative, and we'll go a little more into the background narrative. Right?
Yeah, nice.
So, with the cult,
Structuralists.
spiritualists.
Yes.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah, about spiritualism. Yeah. I mean, I've been asked quite a bit about, was she a legitimate religious person, which I'm hoping the book complicates that notion overall. But, I believe truly and have all the evidence that I was able to aggregate that she was a very sincere religious actor who believed very strongly in her worldview and in her sort of prophetic destiny to preach the gospel. She was very romantic, and in terms of that, she was sort of this. She sort of prefigures, somebody like Oprah or Gwyneth, in that she talked a lot about sort of personal transformation, positivity. So she was not like a hellfire and brimstone preacher. So it was this softer, more kind of female, possibility-oriented version of the gospel. And, she always said, the 2 things I want in this world are to fall madly in love and to preach the gospel to as many people as possible, to have the biggest microphone possible.
Which crazily in a Christian tradition has a moral and spiritual imperative, right? So it's I have to be a superstar because that's what God wants.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Although it's this big shift, I think it's such an interesting moment just to note, which is that before Aimee, a lot of these churches, American churches, were really known for being small. Like that was sort of the ethos, like coming from the Puritans, is like anti-European, anti-Catholic, very small places of worship, right? Like this very intimate, simple structures. And so she was like this real innovator, if that's the right word, to change that idea. And that change has propelled us forward to now.
And you've mentioned that she was a woman, which obviously in circles of being a pastor is still a fairly fraught issue. So how was that? I mean, people came because she was a spectacle. She was also attractive, right? So she played on people's appetites in many ways, right? Did she write about what the challenges of being a woman in that role, or talk about them, or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely not, she wasn't a suffragette. She didn't, vocally support the women's movement, which was very active at that time. She was really about herself and what she was destined to do. So she kind of focused on that. She had a sort of funny explanation that because Eve was the one who initiated the original sin, it was up to her/women to undo it by preaching the gospel. But I think that was just sort of a rhetorical game that she liked to play with newspaper reporters. I mean, I have heard since the book came out from the church, and they actually said the main criticism that they hear about Aimee is from conservative churches who believe that everything that happened to her after she came back and all the scandal and trials and tribulations were because she was a heretic, because she was a woman for preaching. So it's still, and maybe even more so, not really a part of many churches to have a woman preaching. It's more the exception.
Yeah. Yes, I don't want to derail our conversation from Aimee with women in the priesthood, so we'll return to what happened in the backyard.
Yeah, she was taken to a hospital. She did not. She wasn't in such bad shape, but she told this unbelievable story of being kidnapped by a group of people who were actors from the underworld who called themselves the Avengers. There was a guy named Philippe and a lady named Mexicali Rose, and they had taken her off the beach that day and been holding her in various shacks around California and Mexicali, and then ultimately in the desert for somewhat extended period of time in a shack that had a bathroom. And so she escaped one day by cutting the ropes on her wrists. She had small evidence of torture, like a burn mark on her wrist. But she'd said she'd walked for something like, I can't remember, it was like 20 miles through the desert. She didn't really have a sunburn. She was wearing a white dress and a corset. She didn't ask for water. So right away, people were suspicious. And, law enforcement shows up, and journalists show up in a very significant way. And she sort of says, like, listen, I'm going to tell my story, but I'm going to tell it once, and I don't want to be interrupted. And she gives her version of events. And she gave that version of events pretty much almost exactly for the rest of her life. And she always told that story.
Do you believe her? And what did your reporting reveal?
I believe that she came to believe in her story.
I think we're going to press on that.
Are you?
A little
Okay.
Bit. Yeah.
I mean, there was, when I first started working on the book, I thought, oh, this is kind of an amazing story. And she was unfairly maligned, this kind of, proto-feminist leader who had broken all these boundaries, and then society had clapped back on her in these incredible ways. And then I, started doing research and was like, well, this seems like maybe she was not like, oh, Mexicali Rose was a really popular song at that time. There's a number of things. I always tell everyone to look for the wristwatch in the book, because that's like, the wristwatch was my sort of, oh my gosh, this can't actually be true moment. So did I believe her? I didn't believe her, but I also believe that she really came to believe her version of events.
Yeah.
Like, and it's worth, I'm not just being glib in saying that, because part of this book is about kind of the experience of truth and a person's authority to speak. And so, Aimee made some bad mistakes, but also the people who, she ultimately ended up going through 2 trials, and the people who were prosecuting her were really awful also. Like, it's not like, oh, she was wrong and they were right.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So I don't feel too caught up in that question. I think it's actually really interesting to see the way that she saw things, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That's why I asked in the beginning if you think maybe she was mentally ill.
I've definitely heard people say that. I mean, I have like a private theory that fame makes people crazy. It's not a medical opinion.
You're not a doctor.
I'm not a doctor, but I think that, just in my experience of sort of reporting on celebrity and seeing what happens to people, I think there's this really symbiotic relationship that happens between somebody on a stage and an audience. But I think there's also really something very parasitic that happens. And part of Aimee's story, the back half of that story, is this real, cautionary tale about the early days of fame, and somebody who really didn't see it coming, didn't understand the mechanisms, thought they could tell the press one thing and be done with it, did not understand the ways in which the press would be weaponized against her, did not understand, in some ways was incredible with public image, but also was like very naive about her ability to control it.
Was being exploited.
Yeah.
For her
I also think she disappeared at this moment. I think May 18th, 1926 might have been the last moment when somebody famous thought that they could disappear. That's just like another sort of sub-thesis in this book. But yeah, so I think, like, was she mentally ill? I don't know where she started or what the landscape was. I think she was a challenging person who had already had like a number of what she called mental breakdowns. But I think that her relationship with the public it really drove her into darkness.
So in some ways, when she escapes on that beach, and you do this so beautifully in the book, I mean, it's almost too much. Like that's the thing about being the child of a spiritual leader. The people's hunger for presence with that connection to spirituality through another person is often parasitic and really freaky.
Yeah.
Right? And you can feel around her life at that point, there's no way people want to consume her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So there's a vulnerability there that is absolutely, she doesn't come off as like some impresario charlatan who's pulling one over on everybody at all.
No, I mean, later in her life, there's these stories, she, after these trials, which are in the middle of the book and kind of the center of the book, she's sort of like malformed by fame, right? So she ends up getting a facelift, she loses a bunch of weight, and she's very sort of physically and mentally fragile. And her son, who really became her guardian in a lot of ways, would carry her. She would preach for an hour or so. She would be dripping in sweat. She would like leave it all on the stage, and the accounts of people who saw her preach are incredible. but she would be dripping in sweat, and then she would be so weak that he would carry her back to the apartment that was attached to the church, and she would like carbo load and eat just bowls of ice cream, and she wouldn't want to be with anyone except her spider monkey.
There's nothing wrong with any of that. Being alone, the ice cream, or the spider monkey.
Spider monkey.
Okay, so I could ask you questions all night. I am aware that I really want to give a chance to everybody to ask. So I'm going to allow myself one more, and then people will be walking around with mics, I think. So, okay, so biography and this story in itself, how did you end up here, right?
Here?
No, not here. Let's just go to, how did you end up writing this book?
Yeah. I mean, I finished my first book. You know, I grew up in a sort of, I don't know, my kids told me they
Cult?
Yeah, I was like, what are the words? American Hindu. I grew up in the Transcendental Meditation movement in the 1980s in Iowa, and it was a lot of, you know, we had a guru, and we did what he, you know, we lived how he said to live. And so after I finished that first book, it was a memoir, but it was a reported memoir. So I actually did a lot of research on him, and it kind of changed my view. I mean, to come back to what you're saying about your dad, I had always grown up with this idea of this kind of like Wizard of Oz idea of Maharishi, like that he was this, you know, he would only communicate with us via satellite television in the 80s. We would all, like thousands of people would gather and just watch him on TV. So very Wizard of Oz-y. But he, like in researching and going through the university, he has a university, going through the archives, this picture emerged that was much more human and kind of sad.
Yeah.
And even also ambitious, like a sense of his ambition, all of which like had never occurred to me as a kid, where I was just like, bad guru, you know?
Yeah.
And so after I finished that book, I thought, you know, there was also, you know, I mean, there were allegations that he obviously had affairs, Sexy Sadie being like maybe about him. But I thought, like, what does that look like for a woman? You know, I was really interested in that, because I feel like with male charismatic religious leaders, it's like almost a cliche, you know? And I was really curious about that. And I knew about Aimee. I had learned about her in divinity school. I would drive by her temple every day when I worked at the LA Times. It was like on the way to work. And I was just fascinated by it. And then I started ocean swimming and heard about this kidnapping disappearance. And it kind of, it all sort of came together. But I think the femaleness of the story is kind of her story is so interesting, because it is, you know, it's also kind of a cautionary tale about female ambition.
Yeah.
And it's just a crazy moment in time.
It's such a pleasure and an honor to do this with you.
Likewise.
A long way from oceans.
Likewise,
so.
yes.
Okay, so I'm sure we have many questions. I'll let you call on people. Would you like to do that?
Actually, really bad. I forgot my
All right,
glasses.
I'll call on the people. We don't have microphones quite yet. Oh, I see a hand from our friend we came in with, Kevin West.
Is this on? Yeah. I was intrigued by your comment that the book is sort of secretly about Aimee's mother. Could you talk a little bit more about their relationship? Could you characterize their relationship and perhaps describe it a little more than you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, you know, at the heart of this book is this scandal, right? Very quickly after she comes back, there's these allegations that she was in a love nest in Carmel by the Sea. And there's a fair amount of like reporting and evidence to back that idea up. And what you get the sense of from the sort of newspaper archives and personal testimony in these trial transcripts is that all Aimee wanted was for her mother to not believe that version of events. Like, it was very important to her that her mother see her as what, you know, she said she was the day she was born, like this divine prophecy. And so I think, on one hand, this mother's idea of Aimee allowed her to be this truly trailblazing, foundational pioneer of 20th century American religion. Like, without the mother, you don't have that. And without the mother's idea of her that she kind of held for her, and repeatedly over the book, you know, the mother kind of rescues her from bad decisions. And so on one hand you have that, but then you also feel like when she makes this really terrible decision, it's the opinion of the mother that leads her to kind of spiral. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Hi, so I had kind of a two-part question around, you do a really good job of not judging her in the book and not saying what you think really happened. I guess, and you went through, and she stuck to the same story her whole life, but she had all these fights with other people, the lawsuits with her daughter, with her mother. Did any of them ever publicly or even privately that you found say that they doubted her story, her son or daughter or mother? And the second is, it seems likely that they did go to Carmel. Whose idea do you think it was? Do you think it was her idea or his idea? Because it seems kind of, they made some planning, but then a lot about it was cockamamie.
Yeah, there's a sort of romantic, fantastical aspect to that trip they took. So I would say, yeah, I would guess it was his idea, maybe, but I am 100% sure that it was her idea of how to return. And with the incredible way in which she did so. In terms of her family, I mean, one of my favorite things, there's so much in the book, I don't ever feel like I'm giving too much away, but towards the end, there's a lawsuit with her mother and her daughter. And the mother every day, I mean, it's like biblical. The mother brings this giant box to court just to, and she's like, this is my files from the kidnapping. And they're not, she doesn't actually show them to anyone, but she just shows Aimee that she has the box, you know, like kind of just carries it in, carries it out, like just this box is the threat. And the mother gave a few interviews after they were estranged. And yeah, I mean, she said something like, oh, you know, up on a stage, she's the greatest, she's the most incredible person on the world. She's incredible on a stage. And when she's off the stage, she's a human being like everyone else. So take that how you want.
Did you get a mic? There's somebody who's
hi.
been waiting. Yeah.
Hi. Hi. I was wondering, so you've talked a lot about what other people's theories are about how she disappeared and what her theories were, but I'm wondering what you think of it.
My theory? Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not, I hope I'm not being annoying, but I tried not to be super judgmental, and I tried to, you know, there's been books written about her over the years, over the decades, and I found them all like very much weighted by their sort of cultural and social moment, you know, so there's books from the 30s that are incredibly scathing, you know, books from the 60s that read like Valley of the Dolls, you know, there's two books in the 90s, and one is very, you know, the whole trial, kidnapping is like this big, and it's, you know, sort of trying to restore her as an important figure in American history. And I felt like if I could put the facts as they were in a narrative and the different versions of the facts, you know, I mean, I think that's as close as we get to the truth. But I didn't want to speculate so much. And I know you probably think like, oh, she probably secretly is speculating, and I am very judgmental.
No, you are.
I am. I'm so judgmental. Many
not
people in this
compared to
audience
some
know this fact. But I feel like, yeah, it's pretty obvious that she went on a sexcapade. Yeah.
Perfect. Nice section break.
There you
Now
go,
there's a
Anna.
hand. If you put your hand up, there you go.
I actually grew up in Foursquare.
Amazing.
And in LA, and
Foursquare is Amy's church. It has 8 million members today.
and I went to Angelus Temple, and we enacted a lot of Sister Amy's former preaching and sermons. So I was kind of bracing myself, even though I'm not part of it anymore. Nevertheless, it's just so part of my formidable years.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because a lot of what's been, I guess, thank you, a lot of what we've experienced or what I've been indoctrinated with was, she was kidnapped, and it was fishy to me then. And nevertheless, there were accounts of people who were her followers then. And the ones that I was surrounded by when I was, my parents were Foursquare pastors. So I was surrounded by the international Foursquare leaders, and then the districts were. So nevertheless, I am curious as to, it's very likely, I suspect, that you interviewed some of them. Maybe not, but I'm curious because like I said, I'm no longer a part of it. But if you did, how did they view you, considering, you kind of came at it far more objectively and maybe potentially not in favor, or I'm just curious, and has any of them, once becoming aware, even if you didn't directly interview them, what might they have thought of your endeavor? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually found Foursquare really open with me. I mean, I didn't do interviews with the leadership. I've spoken to some people in leadership off the record, and they sort of like joked with me, like, oh yeah, when they give the tour of her house, whenever the kidnapping comes up, people just try and change the subject. So it feels like, to me, like kind of an open secret in some ways, or almost an accepted fact. I found that Foursquare does not emphasize her very much, is my experience. They don't, there's like a couple pictures of her, but it is not like hagiography. She is not like, she's been kind of decentralized. And I think it is partially because of the scandal and what came afterwards. I heard from the church this week about the book. They just, their board just finished reading it, and they said they gave me an A on history, which I loved. Yeah, there you go. That's all I could say. But the thing that they felt was a mistake was that I cast Aimee as the healer and not Jesus, which would be like an understanding of the cosmology of the world that I don't have, that did not imbue the book, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but being aware of that the book is so rigorously, it's, as people have said, it's not judgmental, but it's much more than non-judgmental. It's a rigorous account where the reader has a contract with the author that the author's doing the best to put the truth there on the page. So there's no point at which if you believe that Jesus is the center of the universe, you might have some gripes with every book. But right?
Yeah, that's other
but-
books too.
But it was fun, just to answer your question, just to watch Claire navigate that space with so much integrity, because that is a part of the reporting process when dealing with religious institutions and leaders, is to reach out to them. And we talked a lot about what their responses were and how to handle that material sensitively and make sure they understood what she was up to. So it was really part of your process.
Yeah, I mean, there's an amazing book called Circle of Hope by a woman named
come on.
Eliza Griswold that came out last August, which I
Okay,
highly recommend.
okay,
I
thank
get like 30 more seconds, I think, which does this kind of deep dive into would you say progressive church in Philadelphia? Progressive evangelical church in Philadelphia. And I will just say they deal with kind of 2020 and the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement, and it is in so many ways a prediction of this moment that we're in right now. It's incredible. So highly recommend if you're interested in church leadership issues.
Thank you. Okay.
Or the
More
world.
questions. Yeah, right behind you. No, you. Yeah.
Hi. You talk about her relationship with the public and fame and sort of this way, and her kind of positionality with them. And I was wondering if you feel like her relationship with her sort of congregation proper was the same as her relationship to the general public. Like, was she sort of just this famous figure to everybody, or was there actual sort of community within the congregation in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there was incredible community. I mean, that's one of the things to know about her and why I think she deserves empathy and deserves to be kind of restored to American religious history is, during the Great Depression in Los Angeles, she was essentially like the center spoke of the wheel in terms of outreach and helping people. I think her church fed over, 2 million people during the Great Depression, and the fire department and the police department funneled a lot of their efforts through the Angelus Temple. So she was, while she didn't speak out on the suffrage movement or women's issue, she was very good at taking in women. Like, she had a sort of special spot for that, women who were pregnant or unmarried or addicts. Like, that was kind of her specialty. And she really felt like part of her sense of the world was she really felt, she writes a lot of kind of fascinating stuff about ministering to a lot of heroin addicts in 1920s Los Angeles, which just makes you be like, oh my God, when is when? But she felt like she was really down, in the community. And the church today, so the Angelus Temple is connected to the Dream Center, and the Dream Center, which is like a nonprofit arm of the Angelus Temple, which is all Foursquare, the Dream Center does incredible work in Los Angeles. I mean, of course, it is always with a hope of evangelizing, but they do rehab. They've been a huge part of the recovery efforts for the fires. So they do a lot of incredible things in the community, not just entertainment.
We have time for one more question.
I know it's not a self-help book, but you just spent 7 years of your life researching this woman and learning everything about her. So is there anything you're taking away from this journey as you move on to your next few books? Anything that she taught you that you're going to take away from this?
Thank you for that question. Yes. I mean, one of the things I felt by the end of the book, again, as I've said, I did not grow up in a Christian home. I have mostly learned about Christianity as a reporter or as in academic settings. But what I have thought a lot about with Aimee is this idea of grace, which I think is so beautiful. It's such a beautiful concept of sort of forgiveness and allowing people to be human. And so with Aimee, I feel like it's just this tragedy in a lot of ways that she comes from this community of believers but was not extended any grace. And I feel like we're in a real hot take moment where people are really into, we were talking about language policing and the ways that people are just really hard on each other right now. And I think this idea of grace has been something that I have thought about both for myself in terms of kind of being okay making mistakes, but also extending to other people who I disagree with.
It's a perfect landing place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you all.